third video in our YouTube video summer series. Today we're going to be talking about Mary Spencer, Bill Miner, and the history of photography. And this is what our Tate room behind me is all about. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are currently on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Seal people. Here's a quote from the British Columbia magazine about Bill Miner and Mary Spencer. Mary Spencer was a reserved, soft-spoken, and took pleasing portraits of wistful young ladies and jubilant children. She was also entrepreneurial, determined, and knew a thing or two about technique, the very qualities that led her to capturing the famous photographs of one Bill Miner, career criminal. While Mary Spencer's name is not well known today, her photos have lived on into the future. So who is Mary Spencer? Mary Spencer was born in Dunnville, Ontario in 1857 to Margaret and Abraham Spencer. Her family moved in 1857 to St. Catharines, Ontario. She was the third child of Abraham and Margaret, and her siblings were John, Elizabeth, Libby, and Isabel Bell Spencer. Abraham Spencer, her father, was a skilled carpenter, and Margaret Spencer was a dressmaker. Abraham arrived in Canada from Lancashire, and Margaret followed a year later with children John and Elizabeth. They all settled in St. Catharines, Ontario. In the spring of 1862, Abraham deserted his wife and 4 children without a trace. His whereabouts are still unknown to this day. After graduating from high school, Mary attended a model school and then the Toronto Normal School. At the time, it was common for women and teachers and students to face discrimination and prejudice. Many people were against women being educated or even becoming teachers, and co-education was a novelty. So this is kind of a big deal at the time for her going to Toronto Normal School. And in response to women in general being admitted to this school, a local superintendent of schools wrote in his 1859 official report that few females possess the mental ability and decision of character which is so essential to be a successful teacher. The framers of school law committed to grave error in authorizing females to teach at all. This is from the Toronto Normal School, and this shows that she faced a lot of discrimination. Male teachers were paid significantly more than their female counterparts, and it was estimated that female teachers were paid 65% of what the male teachers made. Despite this, entering the labor force was still enabled more women to have freedom, independence, and a societal influence. So this was a big deal for women at the time. Even though they faced a lot of discrimination in the workforce, it was a big deal. They got to go into society and make money and work as a woman. So from this movement of women coming into the workforce, the new Woman Feminist movement arose. This came in Canada in the late 19th century, and it was white, middle, and upper class women who challenged the conventional Victorian ideals of womanhood. The new woman movement demanded independence and control over their own lives, be it political, economical, or social. These women opposed the tradition that women should be restricted to the home and family by pursuing education, entering the workforce, and becoming involved in political issues. So some of the leaders of this movement, which profoundly impacted Mary Spencer, were Minnie Phillips, Letitia Youmans, Mary Elda Digman, Adele Chisholm, Lady Aberdeen, Emily Howard Stowe, and Nellie McClung. These were some of the key women of this era, and it is thought that from seeing what Mary Spencer did with her life that these women impacted her a lot and made her decide to pursue her career in photography. It's not hard to see Mary Spencer as a new woman. She was an educated career woman that provided for herself and her family. She later became a successful entrepreneur and renowned photographer, which was at the time a very male-dominated industry. Furthermore, she remained independent through her life, and she never married. So in Ontario growing up, this is where Mary developed her love for photography and began to further her studies in photography. Then in 1890, when her sister and mother once again moved to Kamloops, she opened a photography shop. This is where she took photos and also taught oil painting lessons. Her photos and paintings became very popular in the area and were made into postcards and books. In 1909, she sold her business and moved to Summerland with her sister Isabel to run a orchard. She continued to take photos in Summerland until her death in 1938. So she actually has this connection to Summerland because she moved here and she passed away here. So in 1906, she had her big break when the Vancouver Daily Province hired her to cover the capture and trial of Bill Miner. Who was Bill Miner? Bill Miner was born in 1847 and died in 1913. He was reportedly the first train robber in Canada and was the first person to rob the Canadian Pacific Railway. He started his criminal career robbing stagecoaches in California. However, he was caught and put in San Quentin prison. This is one of the most notorious prisons in the world. And he was caught and put into this prison 4 separate times. The last time he was put in San Quentin, he was sentenced to 25 years. So he was in jail from 1881 to 1902. Then when he was released, he almost immediately returned to his life in crime, this time targeting trains. Because he'd been in prison for so long, it changed from stagecoaches, which was like the prime thing to rob, to trains. So trains were the new thing, and those 25 years, it changed a lot, the technology. So in 1903, Miner and some accomplices messed up their robbery attempt on a train in Oregon. One of his accomplices was killed, the other was shot and arrested, and Bill Miner escaped. He fled across the border to BC in 1904, and he posed as a retired rancher named George Edwards. He settled near Kamloops, where he met William Shorty Dunn, who would become his train robbing partner. So Shorty and Miner robbed a CPR train near Mission, and this was actually quite a successful robbery. They got away with $6,000 in gold dust, $900 in cash, and $50,000 in bonds. This meant the government was very much after them. They wanted this back, what they stole back. So the government offered an $11,000 reward for his capture, but they never caught him. Then, in May of 1906, Bill Miner struck again with Shorty and his new partner, Louis Cahoon. They held up a CPR train, but this robbery didn't go to plan. Usually when they would rob a train, they would board the train in an isolated area and take over the train engine and unhook the express car, which is the train car that carried the money and the mail, which was what they wanted to steal. They would then send the rest of the train on its way. However, this time they unhooked the wrong car and only got away with $15 and a bottle of liver pills. So they went on the run. A $15,000 reward was offered for their capture, and search parties were sent out with police. Cowboys, detectives, and bloodhounds and indigenous tractors all were after this guy. The gang was eventually caught. Shorty Dunn was shot while trying to escape capture, and Louis and Bill were caught. Shorty and Louis were sentenced to shorter sentences, but Bill was sentenced to life in prison in BC. So as they were going well, and then they actually got themselves caught when they did a really botched train robbery. And when Bill Miner was put in prison, he actually escaped and fled to the US, where he continued to rob trains until 1911, when he was arrested again and put in another prison. But even that prison couldn't hold him, as he escaped twice from that prison. However, they eventually kept him locked up, and he died in prison in 1913. So Bill Miner was a very famous train robber, and some called him the gentleman bandit. Why? Well, it was because he was known to be super polite when he robbed people. And he actually coined the phrase, hands up. So this was Bill Miner's phrase that he came up with. So when Mary Spencer got the opportunity to photograph his trial in Kamloops after that botched train robbery, this was opportunity of a lifetime, because everyone wanted to see a photo of Bill Miner, the famous train robber, and she got to be the one who took the photos, which was very rare for the time. So this was very, very rare for the time, because women weren't actually allowed into the courtroom at the time. And she somehow got in and got to take photos, and she was the one who got to take the photos of this famous Bill Miner. And that put her name on the map as a famous photographer within British Columbia, Canada, and the world. When do you think photography was invented? So Mary Spencer was a photographer. When do you think it was invented? The photography we recognize today was invented partway through the 1800s, but there are some other ways to create images that came before this photography. One way was using a camera obscura. This little invention is what gave cameras their name. The camera obscura has been used for thousands of years, so it very much predates modern photography. A camera obscura is a box with slits cut in it to let light in. Light going into the box then gets reflected on a surface within the box to create an upside down picture. People have used this camera obscura for a number of different things, like looking into eclipses indirectly so they don't damage their eyes, creating images that can be traced easily, and they were even just used for fun for a lot of times. They were very much a novelty in the past, and it was something new and fresh that people haven't seen before. So we can make our own camera Obscura at home. We call them pinhole cameras, and I actually made one. It says pinhole camera on it, and you look into it. Basically what you need is a light and a dark blanket. Fortunately, I couldn't find that in the museum, but you look into the hole, and on this side we have wax paper, and basically with the light and the blanket over top, you can actually see the light reflected upside down on the top of this box. So that's kind of cool. And you can make one yourself. I have it linked below of how to do it. So the first form of modern photography, the kind that we're super familiar with, was invented in 1824 by Nicephore Niepce. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, it's a very strange name. He called this form of photography the helography. He would cover a silver plate in an asphalt mixture and place it in a wooden box with a glass lens to let both light and the photo in. He would then let it sit without disturbance for several days, because that's how long it took for this camera to create an image. A handful of days for one photo is a long time. So Nicephore enlisted his friend, a man by the name of Daguerre, to help him streamline the process, which they did. They cut the time for this photograph to develop from several days to just one, which is still a long time for the photograph, in my opinion, but it's better than waiting a week for a photo. After Nicephore died, Daguerre continued working on improving photography, and he came up with the daguerreotype. This is the first type of photography that had a development stage, like a darkroom when you send your photos to be printed or developed by Walmart or Shoppers Drug Mart. He would take a silver-coated plate with a silver plate coated with silver iodide, a powder that darkens when it's exposed to light, and put in a camera obscura. Then he would take the plate out fairly quickly. It wouldn't look like there was anything on it, but when he would hold it near mercury vapors, it would reveal an image. The process only took 30 minutes, and it was a vast improvement from the last form of photography. When Daguerre created the daguerreotype, a lot of inventors were very upset and tried to claim that they had created photography way before him. So there was a bit of fighting, but amidst all the fighting, big steps were made in the field of photography. So some of these big steps included Hippolyte Bayard finding out how to create photos directly onto a paper. William Henry Fox Talbot found a way to copy images so that you could have more than one of the same image. And John Herschel found a way to fix photos that they wouldn't fade in the sun. He did that by dipping them into a chemical bath. Another big step was made by a man of the name of Hippolyte Fizeau. He switched silver iodide to silver bromide, which was much more sensitive to light, and so reduced photo time from 30 minutes to a few seconds, which meant we could now take portraits of objects that do not move like people. So this introduced portrait. Several leaps were also made in the clarity of photography over the years, as well as the shutter was invented in the 1880s by Richard Meadox, because he created photo plates that were extremely sensitive to light and couldn't be exposed to light for more than a fraction of a second. So the shutter brought it into limit light. So the shutter limited the light so you could have quick photos. So something big was still missing from these photos even after all this innovation. What was that? It was color. Photos were still black and white, and the work on color photography only began in 1848 and only was available to amateurs in 1906. However, at that time, it only came in one shade. Color photography had brought a variety of colors, which were available to the masses in 1935, and brought to everyone by the camera company Kodak, whose name you might recognize because they still make cameras. One of these ways they had colors in their photographs was through Polaroids. And although these aren't photos, you can try and be creative with what you would take a photo of if you were like Mary Spencer. And check out our website and make your own Polaroids so you can print them up on your room, and they're drawings you make. We have a printout that you can use for these. So thank you for tuning in to today's video on Mary Spencer, Bill Miner, and the history of photography. Stay tuned for next week for another video on Summerland's history. You can also come visit our museum, and we actually have an exhibit totally on Mary Spencer. So we have a whole bunch of artifacts, some old cameras like the ones I described, and a whole wall about Bill Miner here in the Tate Room at the museum. So if you come visit us, you can learn so much more and see actual artifacts and our archives that are about Bill Miner and Mary Spencer. You can also check out our website for more information and subscribe to our YouTube for more.